A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support.
I grew up in a small town where secrets, like whispers, traveled fast, but one has clung to me like a shadow. The community was always close-knit, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business. For a long time, I thought that was a good thing, but now I'm not so sure. You see, I was about to embark on paternity leave, a decision that seemed like a lifetime achievement, heralding my step into fatherhood. But here's the twist, there's no actual child. It all started innocently enough. My fiancée, Jenna, and I, like most couples, expressed our desires for a family. We were on the same page, or so I thought, until things spiraled out of control, catapulting me into a web of lies and deception so intricate that escape seemed impossible. About 6 months ago, Jenna showed me a pregnancy test with 2 bold pink lines. We were elated, plans were made, nurseries were painted pastel green, gifts poured in from well-wishers. The glow of impending parenthood was intoxicating and suffused our lives. It was like a dream that I never wanted to end. However, as the months trundled on, I noticed things that to a seasoned observer might have seemed odd. Yet, caught in the thrall of expectant fatherhood, I chose to remain blissfully unaware. Jenna never showed any of the usual signs of pregnancy, she remained inexplicably slim, and our doctor's appointments were always postponed with an impeccable reason. My heart, however, had already given into this tale woven with hope and anticipation. That illusion shattered one evening when I came home earlier than expected. The house was silent, serene, like the calm before a storm. In an uncharacteristic lapse of privacy, I ventured into Jenna's study, a place I'd only seen fleetingly as she snapped the door shut with a coy smile. Papers littered the desk, most of which were benign: bills, to-do lists, envelopes marked urgent yet unopened, but one paper shoved inconspicuously under the rest caught my eye. It was a pamphlet from a fertility clinic, the dates marked on it with a red pen preceding our so-called pregnancy announcement. A cold dread turned my blood to ice, and questions graduated from whispers to screams within my mind. Of course, I could have confronted her right then, demanded answers, but something, a deep sense of loyalty perhaps, or sheer disbelief, tethered me to silence. Instead, I began my covert investigation, slipping into roles both supportive partner and clandestine detective. One evening, when Jenna obliviously prattled about baby names, I slipped her phone from the table, browsing its contents while she indulged in a long bath. To my horror, I discovered long threads of messages between her and someone named Marcus. He was an elusive character in her life, only mentioned in passing as a distant cousin. The messages uncovered a plot thick as night, a fabricated illness, claims of a harrowing miscarriage, false scripts to script fake medical paperwork. The worst came when I realized a darker truth buried in those messages. Marcus wasn't just an accomplice. He was promised the life I was sold, a life spun with fantasies of family and love. I clung to this disillusionment like a lifeline, yet beneath surged a deeper wave of madness that threatened to drown me. But the timing was terrible. Paternity leave loomed, and with it, the ticking clock of an unbirth announcement I was expected to deliver. How could I let the world know we were devastated by a stillbirth, or worse, a dangerous premature birth that whisked our imaginary baby away? I clung so desperately to normalcy that the truth, bearing fangs, was ignored. My beloved wasn't capable of the honesty our love had promised. Tortured by nightmares of an infant's cry never born, and the clinical cadence of machines in a ward where no child slept, I fell into despondency. Events unfolded rapidly after my confession. I didn't quite realize it then, but our small town, with its long memory and intricate network of whispers, had already begun weaving tales of its own. Jenna left one fall afternoon, her silhouette framed against a backdrop of crimson leaves and a sky thick with untold secrets. She left a note, an apology filled with love and regret as hollow as the absence she'd carved. As for Marcus, he disappeared into the annals of the town's long-forgotten stories. No one spoke his name again, and maybe, in their hearts, they blamed me for letting him slip away. In the end, my scheduled paternity leave turned into a personal leave, a time supposedly meant to mourn. I was told to take time off, to grieve the life of a child who never drew breath, and perhaps seek therapy for my purported loss. But how does one mourn the loss of a specter, a mere dream? Now, as I pen this confession from the dim silence of an empty house, ticking away moments suspended between one heartbeat and the next, I realize I've become a ghost of that self, living, or perhaps limping through a reality where love twisted beyond recognition. If you find yourself reading this, spare a thought for those bound by love's deception, trapped in a web spun from their own tender hopes and credulity. Beware the allure of dreams painted in false colors, for, In this dim space between truths, lies the doorway to 100 endless nightmares. There's a certain unsettling power in words, especially when they're echoing around an empty office late at night. This realization hit me hard after what initially seemed like an average day at work, but in reality, turned into something far more eerie. It all started when I overheard hushed murmurs from my colleagues that my weight had apparently become the hottest topic of their gossip. It felt like my very presence was the joke. Initially, I brushed it off, thinking their jabs were just a poor attempt at humor. That was until the voices followed me home. For context, I work at a mid-sized marketing agency where stress runs as rampant as the rumors. "Hey, have you seen Andrea's snack stash? I bet she's got a whole pantry in there." It wasn't the first time I had dealt with such comments, but over time they seeped into my consciousness like poison. The laughter, at first hushed, evolved into an all-consuming noise in my head, an omnipresent mockery that only quieted when I wasn't alone. Desperate to escape the stinging barbs that haunted me even in my solitude, I mustered the courage to speak up, not that I expected any grand outcome from our eternally busy, disinterested supervisor. But the growing discomfort gnawed at my sanity to the point where silence was no longer an option. Our supervisor, Lisa, an acerbic woman perpetually tethered to her phone, listened with one eyebrow cocked in apparent disinterest. To my surprise, she agreed to talk to those involved. I left her office with a glimmer of hope, but it was short-lived. The next day, instead of the laughter subsiding, I found my Gmail inundated with anonymous emails. Sayings no longer just a whisper in my ear now boomed as blocks of text that accused, mocked, and threatened. Saying I had an overactive imagination or claiming I was making a big deal out of nothing. It seemed my coworkers not only found humor in my plight but took malicious pleasure from my distress. Unease curled around my spine as I began receiving phone calls late into the night, voices distorted by a static, yet no less familiar. They never spoke of their identity, only that they knew what I did at work, punctuating the silence with choked laughter. The cowardice of anonymity cloaked them as they uttered things no human should hear. Nights became unbearable. During one such call, the electricity flickered, plunging my apartment into a shadowy void. As I fumbled for my flashlight, the words on the other end grew more frenzied as if they were feeding off my terror, morphing from taunts about my weight to something more sinister, curses invoking misfortune, darkness, and fear that blurred the line of reality. I could almost feel someone, or something, in the house with me, watching, relishing my helplessness. Then came the dreams, or were they visions? I'd wake up drenched in sweat, a shadowy figure looming at the edge of my bed, always fading just as consciousness reclaimed me. And in those moments, when the veil between dream and reality seemed razor thin, I swore I heard familiar voices swirling in the air, taunting, merging with the constant buzzing of those damn emails, filling my head with incessant buzzing. My rational self knew this was impossible, but fear is rarely logical. The paranoia escalated until I began seeing my suspicions confirmed in the subtlest glances from co-workers, in clandestine meetings that dissolved as soon as I entered the room. Did they know? Were they all in on it? Was it some twisted corporate experiment gone wrong? Sleep-deprived and caught in an endless loop of anxiety, I became reckless enough to confront Susan, one of the suspected ringleaders. Her reaction, a blank stare devoid of any emotion, was almost more chilling than the phantom calls. "It's not real," I told myself. "It's all in my head." But the true horror was realized one dismal evening when Lisa called me into a darkened boardroom. Her usual detached demeanor was replaced with something akin to urgency. "Andrea," she began, "we need to talk." Her typical disdain was gone, replaced by something raw and unnerving. Before I could react, the lights dimmed and the projector flickered to life. Grainy footage danced across the screen. It was me, captured in vulnerable moments over the past weeks. I watched in silent terror as clips showed me tossing and turning in bed, startled awake by whispers, haggard and shadow-eyed at my office desk. "This isn't just office chatter anymore. Someone wants to harm you," Lisa murmured, her voice strangled with sincerity, or was it guilt? The room seemed to hum with a living presence, yielding a weight so oppressive I felt my breath hitch. The next words froze the very air. "I thought you might be behind it, but if you're watching this for the first time too, we have a problem." A chill coursed through my veins as Lisa confessed she hadn't believed me at first. That she took part in sending the emails, thinking I needed the humiliation to build character. It was part of the corporate culture, an initiation hazing of sorts, she explained, albeit reluctantly. But then it morphed beyond their control, something darker imbuing the once innocent, even if cruel, office jokes. Someone had added an unforeseen malevolent twist. Who has been filming this? The question hung in the air heavy with terror, But the room offered no answers, just a mocking reflection of fear back at us. Lisa's plan, a desperate grasp at recovery, was to notify the authorities, but I had already transcended trust in institutional safety. As I exited the building that night, the city seemed different, colder, with shadows clad in malicious secrets. That's when I realized this wasn't just an unveiled prank, nor was it a simple workplace dilemma. This was an intrusion beyond the office, a wicked crossing of boundaries with sinister origins. Whether spectral or born from a colleague's twisted psyche, something had found a way to animate my nightmares, to solidify whispers into something physically paralyzing. And as I walked past the residual chatter of the city's streets, those same distorted voices echoed once more, no longer just a metaphorical haunting but an unnerving reminder that some darkness you can't just report to HR. You can't possibly tell what's real once the shadows decide to play. The wind howled through the skeletal trees that lined the dimly lit street as I slowly made my way towards my brother's place. There was always something uneasy in the way the shadows clung to the corners of those cracked sidewalks, as if waiting to whisper secrets to anyone brave enough, or perhaps foolish enough, to listen. My brother, Aaron, had invited me over for dinner, and reluctantly, I agreed. The night was black as pitch by the time I reached his old Victorian house, its looming silhouette akin to those Gothic horrors where every creak in the floorboard seems to tell the tales of restless spirits. I shivered, not from the cold October air, but from an unsettling feeling I couldn't quite shake off. As I opened the creaky gate and stepped onto the overgrown path, I caught a flicker of movement from one of the upstairs windows, but when I looked again, the curtain rustled back into place, the room above disappearing into an abyss of darkness. It was nothing, I told myself. Just kids playing. Aaron had 2 children, Tommy and Lizzie, both under 10 but with the combined chaos of a tornado. The moment I stepped into the house, I was met with an overpowering scent of something burnt mingling with cinnamon, an assault on the senses if ever there was one. Aaron greeted me with a slap on the back, acting like all was well, as if we hadn't spoken less in the last 6 months and I wasn't here out of some obligatory need to reconnect. But his smile faltered for a split second, his eyes betraying a hint of tension. That's when I knew something wasn't quite right. Dinner was a cacophony of noise, the television humming some cartoon theme song and the kids clattering about, speaking a language only they seemed to comprehend. Lizzie chattered incessantly, recounting some tale of playground heroics, while Tommy intermittently poked his sister, obviously finding joy in her escalating irritation. Their volume rose, unchecked by Aaron or his wife, Claire, who only threw a desperate, "Boys will be boys," my way. When my patience wore thinner than the soup Claire had served, I leaned across the table and muttered to Aaron, "Your kids are wild, man. They've got no home training." It was meant to be a gentle nudge, but the words tumbled out harsher than intended, slicing through the room's uproar. An uncomfortable silence pressed down as Aaron's eyes darkened with something akin to betrayal, a brewing storm beneath a seemingly calm surface. Claire too stiffened, her fork pausing in midair, and for a long moment, it felt as though the whole house held its breath. But then the kids resumed their shrieking breakneck speed as if my comment had been absorbed into the ether. Aaron murmured something under his breath, downcast, but the lightning flashed again in his gaze. "You don't know what it's like," he whispered fiercely once the kids had scampered off into the confines of their own madness, "how hard it is. They're not just naughty, okay?" His voice cracked on the last word, and there was a desperation, a plea hidden in the undertones of his confession. I didn't understand. How could I? It's kids being kids, I thought. But the strange occurrences began after dinner, subtle at first, sudden flickers of the lights and the television volume blaring unexpectedly, the kids giggling somewhere unseen, their laughter full of mischief and shadows. Yet, behind the cheerful mask, there was an unease, a chill in their voices that curdled my blood. Claire quickly dismissed my concern with a weak laugh. "They like to play tricks," she said, but I saw it in her eyes, the same fear flickering like the faulty light bulbs. As the clock inched towards midnight, the house seemed to grow heavier. I felt it in my bones, a tickling sense of dread that curled up like a snake in my gut. I decided then to air my concerns, confronting Aaron with what I saw as the root of the issue, the children. It was then his facade crumbled, revealing a raw edge that was more than exhaustion. Aaron and Claire weren't just struggling parents, they were scared. Tommy hasn't been himself since Lizzie. Her accident, Aaron confessed shakily. She was in a coma for days, and when she woke up, she was different. His words echoed ominously. How had I missed it? I'd seen Lizzie only months ago, a sunshine-filled child, brimming with curiosity. Now her eyes reflected a darkness that didn't belong there. It's like they sensed something," Claire added, her voice trembling as though she were recounting a ghost story around a campfire. "Something unnatural." There it was again. That word. And with it, a heavy silence settled, thicker than the fog outside. A sudden giggle erupted from the shadows of the hallway, and I whipped around to see Lizzie peeking from the doorway, her eyes gleaming in the pale, ghostly light. "We have a new game," she declared, her smile stretching unnaturally wide. "Tommy taught me." Aaron's face paled, and in the briefest flicker of candlelight, I saw fear skitter across his features like a living thing. A scream then echoed through the house, breaking the quiet like a shattering pane of glass. Tommy was nowhere to be found, yet the walls seemed to reverberate with his cries. Panic surged through me. I turned to Aaron in confusion, but his attention was elsewhere, fixed on the darkened staircase as if something unseen had caught his eye. Together, we raced through the house, its cramped rooms now a labyrinth pulsing with shadows. By the time we reached the nursery, Aaron's face was etched with a horror so profound, it rooted me to the spot. There, amid the flickering shadows of moonlight pouring through the window, Tommy stood, blank-eyed and whispering into the void. And then I saw it, the reflection behind him. A hunched, grotesque figure lingered just beyond the glass of the old, dust-covered mirror. It was as if the dark had taken form, seeping into reality with an insidious hunger. My gut twisted with nausea and terror as I staggered back, realizing whatever affliction had gripped this home had long clawed itself into the children. Somehow, they'd opened a door that should have stayed closed. Panic-stricken, Aaron and Claire bundled the kids and fled the house, leaving me alone amidst the eerie silence, a silence that held 1,000 screams. Settling into the oppressive darkness, I felt its watchful gaze upon me. Had I been wrong? The words I'd carelessly spoken earlier now echoed back, mocking in my mind. Perhaps they weren't just unruly children. What lingered before them, and now me, inescapably, was something beyond this world, an entity feeding on the innocence of youth, weaving itself into the fabric of their games, their lives. As the clock struck midnight, the house inhaled, and I sensed it, resurfacing with a vengeance, whispering promises of madness. I once thought Aaron's kids just had no home training. In truth, something far darker than rebellion lurked within them, reshaping their reality into a nightmare I could never comprehend. Now, the uneasy quiet settled around me, whispering secrets of bygone terrors, and as I scrambled to leave, the faint echo of a child's laughter drifted gently through the deserted halls, signing my fear and sealing my fate in the house that was both a home and a haunting. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary until the night a girl appeared on our front stoop, a quiet silhouette against the flimsy glow of the porch light. At first, I thought she was just a trick of the shifting shadows. I watched her through the peephole, hair cascading down her shoulders like a waterfall of midnight, eyes fixed and unblinking on the door. She looked as real as the chilled air biting at the windows, but when I called for my husband, Mike, and turned back to the peephole, she was gone. I dismissed it as a misremembered dream until she showed up the next night at precisely the same spot. This time, I swung the door open and felt my breath hitch. It was as if she dissolved into the night air, leaving only the soft rustle of leaves behind. Confused and a bit shaken, I told Mike, who laughed it off, suggesting I was working too many late nights. But this became a pattern. Every night, exactly at 2:04 a.m., she'd be there, sometimes wailing so quietly it was almost inaudible, like a lullaby weaved with despair. I became obsessed, watching the clock as the seconds ticked down to her appearance, insomniac anticipation forming knots in my stomach. One chilling night, curiosity eclipsed fear, and I stepped outside to confront her. As I walked forward, the cold leached through my robe, chilling my bones. She stood unmoving, and when I reached out, my fingers touched nothing but cold air. No prints on the dew-slicked steps, no sign that a living soul had been there. Frustrated, I retreated back inside, only to glimpse her face, pale and pleading, mouth moving soundlessly. I turned on every light in the house, praying for the sun to rise, and researched until dawn, spiraling down rabbit holes about spirits, poltergeists, and time slips that seemed to share echoes of her haunting presence. We spoke to neighbors, hoping for validation or explanation, but they responded with confused glances and dismissive chuckles. During the day, I tore through old photographs, local history books, anything that could reveal who she was or what she wanted, but hit nothing but dead ends. The next night, when she appeared, I tried talking to her, asking if she was lost or in need of help, but was met with silence. I shouted, pleaded, and threw every logical thought into an attack to provoke her into responding. My heart, a relentless drum in the silence, nearly stopped when I heard her faint whisper in the depths of my mind, "I'm sorry." The voice thrummed with sadness, a child's voice tangled in ages of sorrow. Sleep-deprived and fraught, I grew withdrawn, hardly speaking to Mike as he chattered away in oblivion about weekend plans and office banter. The apparition's presence began to affect my dreams, descending like a fog over my nights. In them, I was always searching, barefoot and alone through twilight woods. She was there, ahead of me, just beyond reach, whispering fragments of sentences that dissolved before I could grasp their meaning. Desperate, I sought the help of a local psychic who came highly recommended. Within moments of entering the house, she shivered, confirming some presence lingered with us. With caution, she performed rituals, burning sage and murmuring incantations. We watched, hope flickering in the acrid smoke, yearning for liberation, but the girl remained, untouched and unchanged by the psychic's ministrations. As nights bled into weeks, I stumbled upon an old newspaper article while cleaning the attic. Dated over 50 years ago, it told the story of a girl, a child who vanished without a trace from our very neighborhood, her final sighting painfully aligned with the end of our driveway. Goosebumps seared my skin as her fate unfolded, an unsolved mystery entombed in the passage of time. Her name was Lucy Carver. That night, knowing her name made the encounter even more poignant. Her eyes, wide and mournful, begged for something, understanding, maybe, or a release. I no longer displayed the bravado as in weeks past. "Lucy," I whispered, cradling the thought like a fragile secret, "how can I help you?" The reply softened through the rustling leaves, "Find me." Though the town had long forgotten her name, the search for her remains consumed me. Historical society records suggested she might have been buried in the woods by a deranged neighbor, but no evidence had ever verified the claims. My determination to free her spirit saw me embarking on quests into those woods, the tranquil beauty masking an ominous undercurrent. Over time, I enlisted the help of a local historian and true crime enthusiast named Kevin who'd long harbored interest in Lucy's case. With his help, we conducted metal detection sweeps and cross-referenced every mustard-creased file we could access. One evening, just as exhaustion knotted my resolve, we stumbled upon something in a sun-dappled clearing. What we unearthed was heartbreakingly sparse, fragments of a small shoe, the buckle rust-encrusted, and bits of decayed fabric. As the realization sank in, a profound calm settled over the woods, the air lighter, as if the forest itself exhaled a breath held for far too long. That night, she didn't appear on the stoop. The minutes, then hours, passed, and the space remained undisturbed, a void where her presence once lingered. Finally, sleep fell into me like gentle rain, and for the first time in weeks, my dreams were my own. Lucy was free. There was, however, an unexpected aftermath. News of our discovery rekindled interest in unsolved mysteries throughout the town. While many hailed us as community heroes, the curiosity and whispers surrounding our involvement rarely diminished. The intense attention stirred fresh anxieties. Long after the story's spark dimmed for the townsfolk and Mike returned to his oblivious normalcy, I sensed an enduring vigilance within me. Even now, every so often as night deepens and silence claims the corridors of our home, I listen for the hint of footsteps, wondering if some secrets are ever truly buried, or merely waiting to surface from the shadows of the past. When the advertisement for the revolutionary product popped up on my social media feed, it felt more like a godsend than a marketing ploy. The ad was simple: confession, no more onion growing or armpit smell. Antibacterial spray, guaranteed. The declaration was in bold, vibrant letters, and the testimonials beneath it spoke of life-changing freedom from odors once thought to be incurable. At first, I dismissed it as another snake oil gimmick, but after a particularly embarrassing incident at the gym where my body odor cleared the exercise room, the allure of a smell-free existence became too tempting to resist. My friends called me Rick, but the entire office had other nicknames: Stink Bomb, Funky Brewster, and my personal favorite, Ripeness Rick. Personally, I knew the real issue wasn't with my hygiene habits. My perspiration had an aggressive assault on the senses, a demonic gift from my boisterous biology that no amount of showers or clinical-strength deodorants could tame. The package arrived in an unassuming brown box, and the contents looked as innocuous as they were promising: just a small bottle with a clinical logo and that enticing phrase repeated. The instructions were simple: spray directly on the skin's problem areas once a day. As I looked in the bathroom mirror, my coif of curls sticking messily to my forehead, I gave a sarcastic toast to myself and doused each armpit liberally, and then the groin for good measure. Over the next week, the change was nothing short of miraculous. Not only did the pungent onion-like odor cease torturing my olfactory senses, I felt different. Invincible maybe. There was a pep in my step at work, A newfound confidence that stemmed from the absence of the reeking albatross around my neck. Praise replaced the thinly veiled jokes, and I even scored a date with Jessica, the cute accountant I'd been eyeing since forever. Believe it or not, the spray was more effective than I dared dream, but even I was not prepared for what came next. One evening, as I lay in bed, a deep, unyielding itch settled into the depths of my pits and groin. The sensation spread like wildfire, morphing from an irritation to an almost unbearable burning. Underneath it all, a show that my skin felt thicker, tougher, realization dawned on me, too late. I had seen these symptoms before, they belonged to freakish headlines in the back pages of obscure paranormal tabloids. I rushed to the bathroom, splashing my face with cold water. The steam raised by my skin's unnatural heat fogged the mirror. As I raised my arms, sheer horror cascaded through my mind. Where once there had been hair, follicles dark and dense, only smooth scales glistened under the flickering bathroom light. Horrendous, rough scales that shimmered and twitched like creatures with lives of their own. Shuddering, I tried to scratch at them, tried desperately to peel them away, only for the skin beneath to pucker and tear like a rotten fruit. That night, sleep was a stranger, a blessed reprieve snatched cruelly from my grasp as the scales seemingly began their monstrous journey towards confluence, crawling and converging towards my chest, sprouting insidiously along my collars. I woke the next morning, a freshly grown festoon of scales around my neck, like a chain wrought by an unholy blacksmith. Work was impossible, I couldn't go in, couldn't allow anyone to see. My phone buzzed intermittently, the concerned faces of coworkers flashing upon it, but I remained steadfast in my refuge. Desperation clawed at my mind, driving me online for answers or solace. What I found instead were whispers, murmured accounts buried deep within dark forums, posts that hinted at a grotesque community plagued by similar battles. The advertisements were bait, promised miracles that only led to curses unimaginable. Each post a testament to the unending itchiness, to scales advancing on their own sinister journey across skin, and more disturbingly, to transformations that went far deeper. Incredulity pulled at my sanity when I read of those who claimed bipedal humanity was being snatched away from them, transitioning into creatures of nightmares, isolated, feral. The confessions diverged, some laced with the horror of relinquished limbs, others converging on a single grotesque revelation, voices, echoing, whispering, calling from the scales themselves, offers of a future, warnings of inevitability, summoning senses where none had belonged. I was at the brink of madness, spinning out of control, waves of self-loathing and panic crashing against my resolve. But behind it all lurked an unwelcome acceptance. I was only one among many. Resigned, I dragged myself to the bathroom again, witness to the grotesque spread. The mirror's surface warped as if scorched by the presence of wrongness reflected back at it. What remained of my skin seemed mere patches within a tapestry of scales, my face barely mine and something's else. I had ceased spraying after the first nights, but it was too late for defiance or regret. With each passing day, my senses expanded, cries from the scales louder, clearer. They spoke, not in words, but in impressions, emotions, urgings towards surrender, towards understanding. It was tempting, the allure of synchrony with something greater, something ancient. Grace with a twisted hue as if dipped in the miasma of forgotten eons. I had sought relief, yet found communion, their confessions imprinting upon my soul a succession of revelations I would never fathom as a man. My date with Jessica never happened, couldn't happen, really. I was withdrawn, keeping my transformation hidden from all. The support turned into resignation, and the rumors of my fate possibly wilder than the truth took on lives of their own, becoming a legend for the ages or at least until the next victim found themselves missing morning coffee due to unwanted afflictions. And as I sit here typing my confession to you, dear reader, I feel the unrepentant tug of the void, the gnawing realization that my story is but a fleeting note in the grotesque symphony conducted by the unseen hands of fate. Perhaps you will heed my warning, or maybe curiosity will lead you down a similar path to mine, into the dark company of the scales. Remember, no matter what the promise of sweet release might hold, some solutions cost far more than we are ever prepared to pay. Having grown up reading myth asshole threads religiously, I never thought I'd have a personal story that would fit the bizarre mix of family drama and ghostly horror they often entailed. Yet here I am, feeling the very texture of Reddit threads scrolling beneath my fingertips as I recount the unsettling week I had with my sister-in-law, Jenna, who seemed oblivious to the spectral nature of her claims on a house that was never truly hers in the eyes of the living or the dead. For context, our father-in-law, Gary, was an eccentric man known for his peculiar lifestyle choices, but if there was one thing he was clear about, it was that his small, cobblestone-laden property situated on the edge of a forgotten forest was to remain unclaimed until his departure being the word he specifically used instead of death. Gary's will explicitly stated that his house would be sold, and the proceeds donated to his favorite cryptozoology society, much to the chagrin of Jenna, who somehow convinced herself that she was entitled to the property as some form of inheritance, based on what she described as silent promises whispered to her by the house itself. I didn't think much of it at first. Jenna always had a flair for the dramatic, claiming to have spiritually connected with the souls of our ancestors each Halloween, complete with sage burning and interpretative dances in the family living room. However, it was the day after Gary's passing that things spiraled from inconvenient entitlement to supernatural dread. Jenna insisted on staying the night in the old house, determined to confront Gary's spirit and coax him into granting her claims, while we all thought she was simply grief-stricken and beyond rationality. My husband, Gary's only son, and I hesitantly agreed, more out of exhaustion than compliance, thinking she'd soon enough hit the walls of reality and relent. It wasn't until midnight, when the air felt thick with something unsaid, that the phone rang, the kind of ringing that cuts through the bone, vibrating with a sense of urgency uncommon for such an hour. Jenna's voice was barely a whisper, yet jagged and cut through with fear, urging us to come to the house immediately because they had decided to convene. Who was they, you might ask? Conveyed in hushed, half-sobbed tones, Jenna described the dark silhouettes forming out of nothingness in the shadowed recesses of each room within the house, shadows that stretched and morphed into people, old and newer ancestors of the family, she claimed, though there was something inherently wrong with their transient forms, as if they slithered under their skin rather than truly inhabited it. Panic-stricken but skeptical, we made our way through the murky, windswept roads leading to Gary's estate, guided not by belief but by sheer concern for Jenna's mental well-being, or so we thought. As we pulled up the driveway, the sight of the house sent a chill down our spines. The windows, riddled with frost in the middle of August, seemed to weep a silvery residue like tears frozen in time. The once homey structure now loomed as a spectral sentinel of secrets we weren't meant to uncover. Inside, Jenna sat cross-legged on the dusty wooden floor of the foyer, her eyes transfixed by the gathering of faint, contorted figures framing the dim candlelight she had strewn around the room in a desperate attempt at illumination. What do you do in such a bizarre situation? Laugh it off as one of Jenna's theatrical outbursts, or engage with the haunting at hand? Out of respect for the uncanny, we chose the latter. Jenna, let's go, I said, gripping the cold banister as I attempted to help her up, but she resisted, insisting that they had yet to deliver their judgment. And there it was, the murmur of disembodied voices, a chorus of guilty whispers reverberating from the very walls themselves, each distinct yet incomprehensible, merging into a cacophony of chaos that threatened to unravel my understanding of reality. Among the rabble, a singular voice emerged with clarity. Gary's. He rebuked Jenna's claims, his ethereal sentence dripping with a mixture of amusement and sorrow, eerily amused at Jenna's audacity to leverage a material gain against an ancestral vow of mystery. The house, he said, voice echoing through the wiring and wood, belongs only to the secrets it keeps and the stories it whispers into the void. In that moment, the shadows surged forward as one, a rushing tide of ancient grief and potent justice, and I realized the truth, that the house was claiming Jenna, mind and soul, merging tradition and treachery into a living lesson for those who dared to misunderstand, forever inscribing our family's follies into its foundation. A battle of heart ensued, our voices joining to pull Jenna back from the abyss Gary's house had become, to wrench her free from the grasp of ancestral debt she should never have dared to shoulder. With one desperate final pull, her eyes snapped open, cleared of the haunted haze, as she stumbled back to us, stunned, silent, and suddenly burdened with the realization of how narrowly she had skirted the edge of her own unraveling. The figures dissipated, leaving only the chilling echo of Gary's laughter in their wake, a reminder that some inheritances are better left unclaimed. Since that night, Jenna has never mentioned the house, save for its fleeting appearance in her dreams, dreamt whispers urging her not toward ownership but understanding. And it seems the house, satisfied with its revelation, has since returned to its dormant vigil, a house that is no longer simply the dwelling of our father-in-law but a keeper of complexities and heartaches, quietly resting on the forest's edge, forever humming its ghostly lullaby. As for me, I'll spare my detailed encounters for future therapy sessions, lest they dig too deeply into the nightmare fabric of Reddit threads yet to be spawned from the depths of imagination or memory, whichever governs the truth. I've always been the person people look at and think has it all together. I guess that's why it feels so strange confessing this here, to faceless strangers, but maybe it's the only way I won't implode. So here it is, I'm incredibly miserable, and I have no one to talk to about it. This isn't how things were supposed to be. I worked my way through college, landed a stable job, and even married my college sweetheart. That was supposed to be the American dream, right? But dreams have a nasty habit of twisting and warping until you don't recognize them, and you're left in a nightmare. Every morning, I walk the halls of the corporate office wearing a mask of competence. I handle mergers and acquisition deals with a smile that could sell a lie as truth. The only ones who see through it are a few disgruntled coworkers, their whispers in the break room sounding like snakes hissing in my ears. "She's going places," they say, but it feels like the only place I'm going is further into my own misery. It must have started with the move to the suburbs. Derek, my husband, assured me it was what we needed, a new start, a bigger house, a dog even. The white picket fence was supposed to be our safeguard against the chaos of the city, but all it's really done is isolate me further. Each day, the suburbs grow quieter, more suffocating. Even Derek seems distant, our conversations reduced to exchanges about grocery lists and mortgage payments as if real connection is something we can no longer afford. And the dog, Rufus, bless him, he seems to notice my despondence, his sad eyes following me around the house as if he's the only one who understands. It's funny, isn't it? How the silence becomes so loud. At night, the creaks and groans of our supposedly perfect home whisper secrets I can't unravel. One night, as Derek lay snoring beside me, I started hearing a tapping sound, rhythmically constant, tapping from the walls, the floors, or maybe beneath the bed. It was impossible to pinpoint, maddening like a drip that never ends. Derek claimed he couldn't hear it, accused me of stress or fatigue, said I should see someone about it. Talk to someone, he insisted, pretending to care. But who could I talk to? No one wants to hear the perfect woman, the successful executive, admitting that maybe she's on the verge of falling apart. I told myself it was nothing, just the house settling, an old cliché to calm my newly fervent paranoia. But then it got worse. The tapping turned to scratching. Soft, insidious scraping noises that burrowed into my head like a bad melody. I attempted to drown it out with headphones, but the air took on an oppressive weight. I swear, some nights I could feel vibrations running through the floorboards like a heartbeat. The rational part of me, what rational part there is left, argued it was mice or some other nuisance, but something deeper inside suggested it was sinister, different. It was during the third week that I found the notes. Small paper, slips, no larger than a fortune cookie message, tucked in random places, under my pillow, slipped into my coat pocket, even once in the pantry between cereal boxes. "I see you," they said. It was such a simple message, yet it rattled me to my core. Derek laughed it off when I showed him, accused me of working too hard or even planting them as a cry for help, which made me feel more alone than ever. Was that all this was? A manifestation of my own desperation? But why would I do this to myself? Desperate for some explanation, any release, I started documenting everything. Each scratch, each note, each gut-clenching moment of dread. All neatly typed into a journal on my laptop, a private confession of my unraveling mind. Then one night, the sound led me down into the basement. The scratching was all-consuming there as if it were a beast beneath my skin. Hard hammering, I pried up a loose floorboard only for the sound to stop instantly, leaving an eerie silence that felt like taunting laughter. And that's when I saw it, a small, decrepit box of old off-white letters. Each envelope was marked with frail handwriting unmistakably similar to my own. My hands trembled as I leafed through, recognizing shadowy versions of my biggest insecurities and fears in slanted script. And below all the letters, a worn photograph of a woman who looked like me but different. Her eyes were lifeless, empty. On the back, in that same familiar handwriting, was inscribed, "I've never left." That's when everything clicked, the unwelcome realization slipping through the cracks of my sanity. This wasn't an obsession of a stranger or a sick prank. What I saw in the photograph was myself, a future self perhaps, or a past me newly unearthed. I couldn't breathe. The house, the perfect life, it wasn't a dream. It was a chronic deception tying me to something dark, something buried. Now I understand how misery thrives unseen, sewn into the foundation, subtly driving me to madness. Returning upstairs, I found the journal open, keys creaking under phantom hands, letters typing on their own. I slammed the laptop shut, the echo resonating through the emptiness of the house, the oppressive quiet of suburbia closing in. Derek returned from work, finding me in pieces, claimed he saw nothing on the journal because he couldn't untangle my inserted psyche from reality anymore. Yet his shadow stretched across the room, across the security of our lives, hinting, knowing. Maybe you won't believe my confession. It's easier to dismiss the distressed as delusional. But amongst these hollow walls, I became a silent witness to my own turbulence, reality layered with subtle terrors. And here, sharing with you, faceless souls who might only mock or dismiss me, it feels like a bitter relief. A small, absurd wish lingers that maybe one of you has seen this creature of despair too. Or perhaps we're all unwitting authors lost in our own creeping stories. I never thought I'd cross this line, but desperation and curiosity got the better of me. You see, my friend Alex and I had known each other since college. We were close enough that crashing on each other's couches after a night out was a norm. Alex was always a bit of a tech-savvy guy. He participated in everything from coding hacks to digital art projects. Lately, he'd been working on something secretive, something that had him missing hangouts and only half paying attention during our usual gaming sessions. When I pressed, he'd laugh it off, calling it a passion project he wasn't yet ready to share. But my naturally inquisitive nature wouldn't let it go. It was during one of these nights, Alex passed out on his couch after polishing off an impressive lineup of craft beers, that my chance came. His laptop, which he was always so protective of, lay on the coffee table, its screen just dimmed, not locked. I should have left it, I really should have, especially with the alcohol fogging my judgment. But a nagging voice inside my head convinced me, just take a peek. What harm could it do to browse a bit while he slept so soundly? The curiosity was eating me alive. Feeling the adrenaline spike, I turned his laptop slightly toward me. The desktop was organized, a maze of folders all neatly tagged. But one folder caught my eye, named with an unusual set of characters that seemed out of place, as if hiding something special. I clicked it open, revealing a trove of file names, all dates and cryptic strings. They were images, hundreds of them. At first, I thought it was his digital art portfolio, but as I glimpsed at the previews, I realized this was something else entirely. Private photos, intimate snapshots of people I knew we both interacted with, some I personally recognized, candid and oblivious, completely unaware they were being documented. My heart thundered as realization dawned, these weren't just any photos, they were taken without consent, a secret invasion into the lives of those around him. Fear and guilt crashed over me, yet an irrational competitiveness urged me to click deeper. In some sick way, I told myself I needed proof, and maybe then I'd confront Alex. But as I scrolled, the severity of what I'd done hit harder. I wasn't just a bystander now, I was implicated, complicit in this breach of trust. The uncertainty of whether Alex noticed stung my thoughts, and a plan hatched in the adrenaline-laced cirque of my mind, transfer them onto my USB. Then, I'd have insurance against whatever madness this was. I could wield this as leverage. Maybe Alex needed help, I reasoned, or maybe he was just going off the deep end without realizing it himself. Either way, these photos had to go somewhere safe before he woke. Hastily, I finished the transfer, my hands shook, my conscience screamed, and still, I shoved the flash drive into my pocket like it was burning a hole to freedom. The next morning was blurry, bleary-eyed from half a night's sleep, and a head pounding with regret. Alex awakened, none the wiser to my late-night escapade. Over coffee, he seemed normal, friendly banter resumed, dissolving into typical shared memes and laughable morning chaos. But my perception of him had changed irrevocably. The laughter felt forced, strained under the knowledge that I was sitting across from a stranger with dangerous secrets. What haunted me most was the choice I now bore, confront him and potentially lose a friend, or sit on this dark secret, risking exposure if he found out what I'd done. But as days passed, something shifted in Alex. He grew guarded, as though sensing an invisible rift had spread between us. He stopped inviting me over, our conversations thinned out, faces reduced to avatars in a chat room. Weeks turned to months, and paranoia shadowed my every step. I felt the burn of those illicit files constantly, the USB a cursed artifact hidden at the bottom of a drawer, waiting for its day of reckoning. In restless dreams, Alex knew everything, and confrontation always ended in dread, accusations, friendships shattered, or worse, a sinister, vengeful alter ego that Alex transformed into, ready to pull me under along with his secret. Amidst this chaos, I reached a defining moment. I needed closure. I contacted Alex, masked my nervousness with a light-hearted excuse to reminisce about old times. He agreed, though his voice hinted an undercurrent of unease. We met at a bar we frequented in better times, our chat dense, deliberately trivial. Then I acted. My heart battered against my ribs as I slid the USB across the sticky lacquered table. His eyes darted from mine to the small device, and back, questioning. It was now or never, my confession stumbled out, words tripping over shame, fear, and thiox of remorse. Silence stretched, A pause the length of eternity where his expression was a void. Then, slow recognition anchored his face, his casual demeanor dissolved into something chillingly calculated. "You shouldn't have done that," he said softly, a strange calmness in his voice that frightened me more than shouting ever could. "You don't know what you've interfered with." His cryptic reply swirled into my mind like a dark cloud, and I realized there was much more hidden behind those files than I'd ever imagined. He pocketed the USB, leaving a parting warning that left my veins frozen, a promise of consequences yet unspelled. His calm threat lingered in the air like a toxic mist, and abruptly he was gone, leaving me alone to unravel my own tangled web of guilt and intrusion. The fear still haunts me, knowing the extent of Alex's true nature remains a shadow tale I glimpsed too late. But the tangled knot of what I'd done feels irreversible, a thorn that stays wedged deep in trust and friendship erstwhile lost. I've come to realize it's not just the photos that changed everything, but stepping into a dark tunnel with no end in sight, where friendship might not survive, or worse, where it mutates, leaving nothing but ruin in its wake. Every Tuesday, without fail, there's a knock on my door at exactly 3:33 p.m. It's an ordinary knock, 3 sharp raps, not too loud, not too soft, just enough to echo through my small apartment, stirring the quiet shadows that cling to every corner. The first time it happened, I thought it was a neighbor, someone needing to borrow sugar or maybe just making an introduction. But when I swung open the door, there was nothing but the chilly stillness of the corridor. No sound, no footsteps retreating down the hall, just the haunting click of the closing door behind me. I dismissed it as a prank, the work of an overzealous kid in the building. But when it happened again the next Tuesday, and then the next, curiosity gnawed my skepticism. Determined to catch the prankster, I set up my phone's camera to record the hallway from my peephole. Tuesday came, and at exactly 3:33 p.m., the knocking returned. Excitement sparked through my veins as I rushed to stop the recording. But when I played it back, my blood ran cold. The screen was filled with static, a dizzying chaos of black and white noise, the hallway completely obscured. My rational mind struggled to explain it, but the unease in my gut wouldn't be silenced. The weeks turned into a pattern, and each Tuesday, the knocks grew louder, more insistent, like an urgency compelling me to action. It became an obsession, and I spent hours devising new plans to catch whatever or whoever was out there. I borrowed books from the library about spirits, apparitions, anything that might hint at the supernatural. Still, they offered little comfort, their pages bleached with speculation and myth, nothing concrete, nothing that could explain the menacing knocks echoing through my life. I tried talking to my neighbors, subtly inquiring if anyone else had heard or seen anything strange, but they only gave me polite smiles and dismissals, leaving me feeling like a madman chasing ghosts in the shadows. On the 10th Tuesday, things changed. The knocks stopped abruptly, silence descending like a thick blanket over my senses. But just as I began to breathe a sigh of relief, the doorknob started to turn, the metal shrieking as if in protest. My heart hammered in my chest, the tingling fear a relentless drumbeat against my ribs. I grabbed a broom, the closest thing to a weapon within reach, and held my breath, armed and ready to confront whatever lay on the other side of the door. With a burst of courage, I yanked the door open, broom poised to strike, but yet again, I was met with emptiness, the leering emptiness of the hallway, stretching out in both directions like an infinite void. It's him. The thought chilled me to my core, and I could feel the shadows wrap tighter around me. I considered moving, escaping the oppressive weight of the Tuesdays that loomed ever closer, but something deeper, an aggravatingly stubborn part of my psyche, insisted that I unravel the mystery. I had to know. The following week, as 3:33 p.m. ticked closer, I prepared myself, armed with nothing more than willpower and fear. I sat by the door, listening intently. When the knocks came, they were different. There was an echo of sadness, an unspoken plea tangled within the rhythm. Against my better judgment, I whispered aloud the question that had lodged itself in my throat. "What do you want?" Silence followed, but the air felt heavier, denser, wrapping itself around me like a tangible presence. Then, just as I felt I might suffocate under its weight, a whisper cut through the stillness, chilling my spine. "Help me." The words seemed to vibrate through the wood of the door, tinging the air with despair and urgency. I knew then that this presence, this unseen visitor, wasn't a threat occupied with malevolence, but rather, it sought relief from something I couldn't begin to fathom. Driven by an impulse to understand, I began leaving messages near the door, scraps of paper, asking questions, silently begging for clarity. Days blurred into weeks as I solicited responses scrawled in desperation. Yet each paper lay untouched, a blank slate, until one Tuesday, When I found a single word scribbled in a shaky hand, lost. It haunted me, the notion of something, someone, lost between worlds, lingering in the corridors of my reality, yearning for a conclusion, a release. I immersed myself deeper into research, growing more isolated in my obsession. The pages of books whispered secrets and posited theories about portals and dimensions, bridges between worlds maintained by unfinished business. Then, I pieced it together. It dawned on me that the spirit had been seeking not just help, but someone who could listen, or perhaps someone worthy of trust to fulfill an unvoiced plight. Armed with newfound insight, I committed to helping the entity find peace. My perception altered. I began focusing on the messages I left behind, urging them to communicate more freely, promising to aid them in whatever they needed. My dedication was finally rewarded one Tuesday when I found a line of cryptic numbers and words, scattered across the paper like puzzle pieces. Slowly, painstakingly, I deciphered the meaning, a location, and an inevitable hint towards an event transcribed in the annals of tragedy, the abandoned stone house at the edge of town, ominously marked by history as the site of unresolved calamity. Armed with trepidation and resolve, I ventured there, steps echoing in the emptiness as the shadows of history shrouded the doorway. Whatever awaited me was nothing like the living world, but there, I believed, lay the end of my visitor's languor. The house, an impressive ruin of gnarled wood and stone, seemed to breathe memories. Then, from the silence, emerged a revelation, a dusty, forgotten photograph of a face half obliterated by time, but the eyes, endlessly sad and eternally haunting, unmistakably familiar. In that desolate place, I understood, it was where they had lost everything, a poignant tragedy carved into the sinews of time. And as the last rays of sunlight fractured the dusty windows, I felt a warmth, a silent thank you, a relief washing over me that surpassed words, enveloping the house, the spirit, and my weary soul. The knocking ceased after that. No longer did Tuesdays bring dread but rather, a quiet serenity, as if the world had righted itself, and I was simply a narrator of its peculiarities. Life flowed patiently forward, but I can't forget those Tuesdays and the man who visited, the specter seeking solace from a realm just out of sight, whose story is forever etched in the depths of my memory, a reminder of the thin line separating our world from the unseen. I never thought I'd end up turning to the internet for something like this, but the shadows in our little farmhouse have grown unnervingly long, and I can't shake the feeling that there's something unspeakable lurking just behind my sister's pleasant gaze. It all began when Sarah moved in with us after the birth of her baby, David. My husband, Tom, and I live a quiet life on the edge of a thick, ancient forest in upstate New York, a setting both beautiful and eerie, especially during the onset of autumn. Initially, I was thrilled to have my younger sister around. We were always close, and having her stay with us during such an important time seemed like the natural thing to do. But soon after she moved in, I started noticing things, or, rather, the absence of things that should have been there. The farmhouse had always been peaceful, yet it wasn't long before an unsettling silence settled over everything, a quiet that made the hairs on my neck prickle while tending to mundane chores like hanging clothes to dry or stirring soup on the stove. Sarah was breastfeeding David often, and she did so freely, anywhere around the house. As a mother myself, I never found this peculiar, but Sarah's demeanor during those moments felt increasingly strange. There was something in the way she held him, not the typical warmth of a nurturing mother, but an intensity, a focus on him that seemed almost predatory. I dismissed it as postpartum exhaustion at first, but my unease grew with every passing day. The real turning point was one chilly evening when I politely asked Sarah if she'd mind covering up a bit while breastfeeding, not out of prudishness, but because Tom was visibly uncomfortable one evening during dinner, his eyes darting away with a tension that seemed to seep into the very fabric of the house. Sarah gave me a look then, a look so cold and full of malice that it chilled the air around us. She didn't say anything at first, just smiled, a thin, tight-lipped smile that made my stomach twist. "You wouldn't understand," she said softly, more to David than to me, as if the baby held some ancient wisdom that eluded the rest of us. That night, I dreamt of whispers, a soft, slithering sound like hushed voices gibbering in a language I couldn't recognize. I awoke in a cold sweat, the shadows of the room pooling malevolently around the bed. I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. The feeling lingered the next day, and the growing tension between us was palpable. Things began disappearing around the house, small things at first, like paperweights or keys. Then, more disturbing ones, such as the crucifix above our bed and the old clock pendulum we inherited from Tom's grandmother. The missing items inexplicably faded from memory, and I couldn't figure out why I felt relieved every time one vanished. The forest, normally a comforting embrace of deciduous giants, now loomed like a writhing entity pressing against our windows, its presence invasive and overbearing. I took to closing the curtains, shutting out the sight of the gnarled trees reaching toward us like cursed fingers. Meanwhile, Sarah never left the house, her attention devoted entirely to David, who cooed and giggled in a language of his own that seemed to resonate with the murmurs from my dreams. I grew desperate, confiding in Tom, who insisted it was merely postpartum stress affecting us all. I wanted to believe him, but thought I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. That horrific suspicion was confirmed one bone-chilling night. Woken by what sounded like soft singing, I slipped silently downstairs, the floorboards creaking beneath my cautious steps. I followed the eerie melody to the living room and froze. Moonlight slashed through the window, illuminating a tableau that should have been ordinary but was instead terribly wrong. Sarah sat cross-legged, hair tousled and wild, eyes reflecting the moon's cold glow. She wasn't singing to David but whispering, those same forbidden intonations from my dreams, and he wasn't asleep. His eyes, somehow mature and knowing, seemed to nod along with her voice. I gasped unintentionally, and instantly the atmosphere shifted. Sarah's head snapped up, eyes burning with a cyclopean ferocity I'd only seen in my darkest nightmares. "He's ours now," she whispered, voice suddenly layered with an echoic resonance that vibrated through the air, setting my teeth on edge. The room itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. "What do you mean?" I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady, though panic clawed at my insides. Sarah stood, cradling David with inhuman strength, and as she rose, shadows bled from the corners, coiling around her like sentient tendrils. "You wanted me to cover up, didn't you? Well, there are things, secrets meant to stay hidden from unbelieving eyes." Her voice wasn't hers anymore, it had taken on a sepulchral timbre that thrummed with preternatural authority. I backed away instinctively, my heart racing, every primal sense screaming to flee. But something heavy anchored my feet to the floor, compelling me to listen, to understand. Before I could blink, Sarah whispered an elegiac phrase that burrowed deep into my psyche, and I collapsed, consciousness slipping away like a receding tide. I awoke to Tom shaking me, daylight flooding the room, erasing the oppressive night and its encroaching dread. "It was a dream," he insisted as he led me upstairs, his arm wrapped protectively around me. Yet, his eyes remained clouded with doubt. Sarah and David were gone when I awoke that afternoon, without a trace left behind except for the memory that gnawed at my sanity like a rabid beast. I scourged the house and the nearby woods for hints of my sister and nephew, but all I found were the missing objects, returned to their places, none the worse for wear. Despite my insistence, Tom refused to accept what I saw. But I know, deep in my bones, that the forest watches, waiting for me to see again what I've mindlessly begged to forget. And now I remember why I turned to Reddit, as some part of me prays that collective eyes can confront the truth those wild woods have already claimed from me. As for Sarah and David, I fear they are beyond our reach, swathed forever in those murmurings that promise only hidden visions and infinite dread.